Well, here we are talking about coaching and psychedelics with a very special guest, Lorna Lee. Hello, welcome to the podcast.
Sorry, Lorna Liana.
Lorna Liana, okay.
Yeah, Lorna Liana. Yeah, I have a different psychedelic name than my passport.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, I went in the email and I saw Lorna Liana at first.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
It's confusing, I know, but like in Asian countries, like it becomes a little bit tricky. Some of them are actually punitive about what you do outside their national boundary borders. So China and Thailand, and then like Indonesia, Bali, like yeah, I got arrested in Bali. It sucked. For like something that didn't have any DMT in it. Like it was just like a sample of Banisteriopsis caapi extract, which doesn't have DMT in it. But it was just, it was like a total shakedown. So it was super stressful. Yeah.
We're jumping straight into the deep end. Nice getting to know you that way.
All right. Yeah. It's occupational hazards.
Hey, Lorna Liana, I'm so happy to have you here. I think this is going to be so much fun. We were laughing a lot already. But first of all, Julia, we're together with a guest finally after so many months.
First time in the foreground as well.
Indeed. I am so excited to have you both with me today. Let's jump into it, shall we?
I'm ready.
Good. Well, Lorna, I feel there's also already a fantastic window, but we always ask people, how do you introduce yourself if you find yourself at a dinner party and you're talking to someone? And I know that might be context specific, but I wonder if there's a way that you generally answer the question, hey, what do you do?
Yeah, so usually I say, I'm a psychedelic media publisher and founder of an educational platform that offers programs, courses, and workshops related to psychedelics and plant medicines.
Okay, great. Well, Julia, where would you start when you hear that sort of thing to explore a little further?
What a wonderful elevator pitch. So how did you come there? So what was your path to being where you are now?
Well, when people ask me how I got involved in this whole world of, media publishing and online program creation, I basically credit ayahuasca. So, goodness gracious. Are you ready for a story?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes. 100%.
Okay, so back in the day, I want to say it was around 2003, 2004. Goodness gracious, how long ago was that? Like maybe 17 or 18 years ago. So I ended up with a group of people in Northern California who, unbeknownst to me, were all students of a cutting edge program, educational institution called the California Institute of Integral Studies, or CIIS. And at that time, I had no idea what CIIS even was. I just kind of thought it was like a really cool hippie school in downtown San Francisco. I didn't know that, the people that eventually became my community, my friends, were all in a graduate program around consciousness expansion and psychedelic, states of mind.
How did you happen to run into them?
At a hippie party.
Just at a party.
Yes. So what ended up happening was I met this lovely woman by the name of Caitlin Naramore, who is a coach. Now she's a coach that has a program called Modern Queen Academy, I believe. But back so many years ago, I went to a Vipassana retreat in Koh Phangan, Thailand, and she was in that retreat. And so we had a really lovely connection, and we're both from San Francisco. So when I ended up back in San Francisco, I ended up being invited to her birthday party, which had just a wonderful group of people. It was just the room was full. It was like a big ring of people around this living room that they emptied of like all furniture, and it was like the loveliest people. And so we went around in a circle, and everyone had a moment to announce what they were working on. And so then the person who ended up becoming not only my closest friend, but the person who served me my very first cup of ayahuasca, she stood up and announced that they were opening a circle to work with plant medicines. It was going to be a closed circle. So they were opening it. And then once the group assembled, they were going to close it. And then they were going to work once a month with plant medicines as the same group for, I don't know, however long, right? And it was a vision that she received in medicine ceremony. And so I had already by that time heard all about ayahuasca, but I also had the intention of really, finding the right people to sit in ceremony with, and not really to do it as a touristic thing, but to find, people that were really on a spiritual path. And so then I had this sense that these people seem like they're doing this for spiritual and personal development, and not because it's like a tourist attraction in, Sacred Valley, Cusco area. So, because that was another kind of like opportunity I had when I was traveling. I was like, I don't really want to do a, tourist thing. And so I asked her, I actually approached her like, I'm very persistent. So I approached her like, multiple times. And she, in the back of her mind, she was like, if somebody makes the same request of me 3 times, then I will go ahead and, accept that request. So I think I asked her 3 times to join the group. So she accepted me. And I was like, kind of like the one person outside their friend circle that was now in this group. And so we started to, drink ayahuasca, but the ayahuasca that was being served was not a traditional ayahuasca brew. It was an analog of ayahuasca, chacruna, mimosa, hostilis, and Syrian rue. And so it was wildly visionary. It was so visionary that when I actually drank traditional, authentic ayahuasca, I just kind of be like, so where are the fireworks? I was like, so used, but it was just coming. Full on technicolor, otherworldly, interdimensional journeying. And it was like the most life-changing experience of my life.
Wow. Lorna, before you get into that, can I just kind of highlight your path into it and how important that is to coaches asking the question of how can I get involved into this sort of communities and things? You meet people, you go to events that you choose because you want to be there. You connect to the people, you keep in touch with the people, you might invite to other events. You ask people, you tell people what you want, what you're curious about, you make requests, and you might get into circles that might change the rest of your life. The importance of networks, connections, and connecting to people who seem like-minded, and expose yourselves to situations where you might meet those people. It's just so important and shapes people's careers.
Yes. And I would say also, there's kind of like the power of intention as well. Mm-hmm. So to really set an intention of like who you want to meet, that really can shift a lot of things.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, how much of coaching is about clarifying who we would like to meet? So if somebody asks themselves, well, how can I get into a career in psychedelic coaching? Well, get a coach, and maybe you get some bit more clear about who you want to meet and how you might do that. So
also values alignment.
And also consciously leave things out, as you said, like when Cusco, not going there, just intentionally going somewhere else when you feel the call and it's the right place and the right people.
Right. So
another 2 years, from the Cusco, because I knew that I could connect with the experience when I was traveling in Peru, but I had that intention, and then it took another 2 years for the opportunity to really open.
Patience, another fantastic virtue. And
then I should also say that because of that intention, little did I know that all those people that I was in community with are now the faculty teaching at all the other prestigious psychedelic training programs now. Those same people are teaching at Synthesis. They're teaching at Beckley. They're teaching at CIIS. They're teaching with MAPS. They're teaching, they're teaching at all these programs. And, I never knew that these would be my cohort in my vocational journey for the last 2 decades.
Yeah. And given the growth of the whole field, that's still the case. If you get involved in the community now, it's still expanding so much. You can meet the key people, and they're just people that hanging out at a conference or at an event, and you're still meeting them just as people around in the community. I love that about where we're at the moment.
Yeah. So going back to that moment, right? So that was a wildly visionary journey, and I saw all kinds of things. I saw past lives. I saw, divine entities. It was the first time that I actually, saw my own spirit form, traveling in the astral realm, and it was beautiful. And I was like, oh my God, like, what is inside me is beautiful. And so it was, a very different experience than, in some spiritual traditions where the whole paradigm is around perfecting yourself, but like you're unclean now. And if you go through these rigors, then you will arrive at a place where like you will be, more pure so that you can be enlightened, something like that. So it kind of, it creates this striving, it creates this like, dissatisfaction with self. And so the beauty of this plant medicine was kind of like, no, you're okay the way you are, and you're beautiful. And it was just really healing to have that experience. So I sat with those folks for like, maybe, once a month for 6 months. And then I had this, really profound, urge that I needed to go to the Amazon and connect with the indigenous wisdom keepers, whose culture it is that uses these plant medicines, because being in California, in the United States, in a culture where, it's it's not part of the culture really. So it kind of was starting to feel a bit like discombobulating, where we were in this bubble, like just, us, this group of CIS folks and me. And then like, the rest of the world is like very material, like Western rational paradigm. And so it was kind of like a bit hard to integrate. It was like two different, polarities. So I just felt, I need to go to the Amazon. So I ended up going to, so one of the people that in the group had not yet published his book, but he gave me his second chapter of his then unpublished book, The Jaguar That Roams the Mind. His name is Robert Tyndall, Jaguar That Roams the Mind. You can find it on Amazon. And at the time, he was partnered with Dr. Susana Bustos, who is a faculty member at CIIS, and she teaches all about vegetalismo. They had studied for about a year or so, or maybe even longer, like with their maestro, Juan Flores Salazar, who has a healing center called Mayan Tuyacu outside of Pucallpa. And so they did their own study and journey, and he kind of traveled around. So he was like, here, go take this second chapter. It was like my tour guide to Acre, because there wasn't even like, more than a page or two in Lonely Planet, for Acre in Brazil. Like everyone's going to Bahia, right? So I ended up there, and again, power of intention. I showed up in Rio Branco, which is a gritty, capital of a frontier, state, at the border of Peru and Bolivia, like, at the border of like the vast wild Amazon, right? Like then there's like, primary, unexplored forest, right? So Acre was like kind of like right there in the basin. And I didn't speak a word of Portuguese. I didn't know a single person. I had a list of emails from Robert, and I emailed everybody in Spanish, thinking, oh, well, Spanish and Portuguese, you got to be similar. And they're like, no, like I got no response except for the one son of the cacique. I guess that would be like the chief or the leader of the Hunaqueen of the Upper Jourdain territory. And so he's the son. His name is Fabiano Kashinawa, or Fabiano Hunaqueen. Hunaqueen means the authentic people. So the Portuguese, the Brazilian anthropologists called the Hunaqueen the Kashinawa, but they call themselves the Hunaqueen, or the authentic or true people. So he just emailed me back and was like, I don't understand anything that you're saying, but he responded. So then, like, I figured out where he was. Like, they had a little, like, Kupishawa, which is like a Maloka replica in like the main square where they were selling their artesanias, their handcrafts. So I would show up there, and then, like, I didn't speak any Portuguese, but like I knew the one word that meant ayahuasca in Hataquin, which is the language of the Hunaqueen. And so I'd go there and say Nishipa. And then they'd look at me and they'd like, reach out like under their desk and pull out this like brown, like recycled Coca-Cola bottle with like thick brown, liquid in it. He was like, yeah, Nishipa, but then it was just like, like, okay,
just like that.
How do we make it happen? Right. So finally, the stars aligned. And so in the interim, before the stars aligned, I ended up like, just wandering around the streets of Acre with a Brazilian Portuguese grammar book, trying to like learn Portuguese, try to communicate with people. And then I wandered into a shop that sold handcrafts. And there isn't a lot of tourism in these areas. Like people who are from outside, they're typically like biologists or anthropologists. So people would ask me like, are you an anthropologist? And I'd be like, no, I'm here in search of the Daime. Because that's like, there's a lot of Daime churches. Like Acre is, the home of the Santo Daime church, the birthplace of the Santo Daime church. So a lot more people understood Daime than they understood ayahuasca. So so I walked into this shop and this guy, looks at me from head to toe. He's like, what on earth are you doing here? And I'm like, I'm here for the Santo Daime. And he's just like, listen. And so he was the only person that could speak Spanish, because he was married to a Peruvian. So we spoke in Spanish, and he was like, look, you can't just show up here and like wander into a Santo Daime church and expect to, drink Daime with everybody else, because if you don't speak the language, if something happens to you and you can't communicate, nobody knows how to help you. The way that it works here is you need to be introduced. So he took me under his wing and brought me to all these different churches all around the Rio Branco and like even as far as like Fortaleza in close to the Bolivian border. And he drove me. Like there was all this gasoline. It was all this time. He didn't ask for anything.
Why do you think he did that?
I don't know. He didn't even hit on me. I mean, it was like he just did it out of like, vontage, like the goodness of his, goodwill, and he was like
seeker.
He was like my guide, like my spirit guide or protector in a way, because, he told me, he was like, look, I haven't drunk Daime in a while, but I used to go to all these churches, but it really helped me because when I was younger, I used to snort a lot of cocaine. I used to smoke a lot of, marijuana and drink a lot of beer. And then I started going to the Daime churches, and all of a sudden, the medicine told me, you need to stop with the cocaine, you need to stop with the weed, and you need to stop with the drinking and focus on raising your daughters. And then all of a sudden he was like, okay.
Wow.
So he stopped. He like, this was before I knew that there's actually an alternative therapy, addiction recovery with ayahuasca is an alternative therapy, much like, iboga is for opiates.
What were you seeking at the time, if anything? You seem to be quite adventurous. Maybe you're just adventurous in nature, but maybe you were looking for something going on all these trips.
I would then thank you for asking. So I kind of got to a place in my career where I was burnt out. I had been in the nonprofit sector, specifically like social enterprise, intersection of nonprofit and social entrepreneurship, for about a decade, and I was burnt out. One of the aspects of nonprofit is that there's a lot of passion and energy, but there isn't a lot of organization or strategy. And a lot of nonprofits don't have the resources to like train up their people with strategy, right? So I was kind of feeling underutilized, and that like there was a ceiling, like I couldn't go past a certain ceiling of, kind of like talent development, and I was burnt out. So I had like, I was in grad school, I had, nonprofit, kind of part-time work, and then I was working in a high-end restaurant. So I decided to take like a sabbatical to go to Brazil. And then my prayer at the time was like, I wanted to connect with my purpose. And so in the time that I was wandering around, not knowing what the hell I was doing, I wrote down a list of all the things I wanted to accomplish in that trip. And little did I know that every single one of those things in that list actually was fulfilled at the end of my trip.
Huh.
How long have you been there in the jungle?
So I was going to be there for a month, and then I gave notice over email, and I stayed there for 4 months.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, so you ready? Because we haven't gotten to the point where I actually ended up becoming a publisher. But so
go ahead. We could ask so many questions. I'll let you get in there.
You want to ask more questions before I continue on this journey?
I just wondered, like, how do I phrase that? What happened in my mind was, I guess the base question was, do you think you could have had ayahuasca wherever you were? Because I'm thinking now it's more available, right? People don't need to randomly pop into the churches and, go into countries where they don't speak the language to find the psychedelic experience. But I always wonder how important is it that you have the journey that lead you to the experience rather than just the experience next door in a center? I think often it's quite important that we actually go seek and we go on that journey and we meet those people, and that the substance itself is only a part, maybe a small part, maybe even an insignificant part of the medicine. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think it really depends on you, right? So for me, it was important to go to the jungle because I kept feeling that urge. So I was with these group of hippies in Northern California, and I was at a certain point, I was like, I need to have an authentic cultural experience and connect to the people like whose culture this belongs to. And that actually it has become a very important part of the work that I do around reciprocity and around indigenous media. But like, so for me, that's kind of like, what I did, and I'd like to travel and I like culture. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go there. Probably in retrospect, when I think about all the ways I could have just disappeared or, had some harm come to me, I might not have chosen to be so like, courageous, but at the same time, I don't know, there's also kind of like having some street smarts as well. It depends, because there's a balance of street smarts when you travel. So I've traveled all over the world and all over South America by myself as a woman, which a lot of people find to be, quite an unusual thing, And then the other thing too is like the world actually has become a more unstable place. So, kind of also different than like the 1970s where you meet some like, elderly hippies now, that might tell you, oh yeah, it was so easy to hitchhike, back then, the 60s and 70s, certainly in the 2000s, when I was hitchhiking, it was a lot more, risky. And I may not have done like international hitchhiking. And certainly not in South America. I did that in Europe. But like now, I'd say hitchhiking might be even more risky because the world's more unstable.
Yeah. Right. So let's get back on track, even though it's all the track, right? Tell us about the experience and how that led you where you are today.
Yeah. So then, so I was going to all these churches, and I was like, okay. And so here's why. Another thing too, is like when you were in a place like Brazil, where ayahuasca tourism isn't as well developed, especially in Acre, For you to have an indigenous experience, you have to be invited by the tribes, because many of these indigenous territories are actually restricted areas where you actually have to apply for permission with FUNAI, which is like the Federal Agency for Indigenous Affairs in Brazil. And if you don't have like official business there, your application probably might languish forever for months, and then it's going to get denied, right? And then there's like no public transportation, there's no tourism, there's no hotels, right? So if you're going to go and visit an indigenous community, you have to have permission by the leadership, and they have to be expecting you because they're going to put you up in somebody's house. And then there's like no public transportation, right? There's no like, everything, there's no road travel. So you have to go by boat. And then for you to go by boat, you have to hire your own boats. So you have to find like a motorista, like a person that's going to like, take you up the river in a motorized like boat. You've got to supply yourself for the entire time that you're there. So that was like, for a lot of people, it means like buying 2 weeks of supplies. So not just like a boat for yourself, your person, but a boat for your gear and your supplies. And then all the gasoline to go up and down. And gasoline's expensive and it's really hard to come by. So when you go up the river, you're going to run into people all the time asking you like, hey, do you have any gasoline? Because it's like a scarce resource, right? And you have to be careful because people will steal your gasoline too if you're not like, storing it somewhere, right? And by having somebody like, watch out for it. That's also risky because then you're going to be stuck and if you're like, depending on whether you're upriver or downriver, right? Like if you're like trying to like travel downriver, then you can just float slowly. But if you're trying to get somewhere upriver, then you're stuck, right? So yeah, and then in order to not be a parasite, and this drives me crazy because a lot of people just like, the indigenous, they don't ever charge you for, ayahuasca ceremony, like, any type of commercial exchange, like, it's just like you being a profiteering, like capitalist, like if you're, charging money for an online training course, I'm like, wait, the online training course, like, like there's no, it's like, anyway, so there's a lot of, kind of like cognitive dissonance between what people associate with monetary exchange and anything to do with medicine, right? But like, okay, sure, the indigenous may not charge you per ceremony if you sit in ceremony with them or their community, but you know what? To not be a Western parasite, you need to supply the village. If you're going to go stay there in their community, you have to bring supplies for the host family and for the community. And that looks like, fishing hooks. It looks like, propellers for your boat because they fall off all the time. It looks like fishing lines. It looks like, pots and pans, matches, soap, clothing. I mean, all kind like food, beans and rice. Like, I mean, this is your contribution. It may not be like I'm paying to sit in ceremony with the community like you would in like a Western ceremony or in a retreat center, but you're making sure that your stay with them is a net positive. Yeah. So, words of wisdom for anyone that wants to go be with the indigenous.
So tell us how those experiences, they led you on a path, right? There seems to have been a key experience that kind of opened something up that ultimately created EntheoNation.
Yes. So then, so I ended up 4 months in the Amazon, traveling around the indigenous territories, and then also in experiencing first, many of the different Daime churches. And then I also lived in the Santo Daime community of Seu de Mapia for 2 months, which is like full on, like it's a whole other world, a community of people. A friend of mine who is a master ayahuasca brewer from Hawaii said this to me, and it really rang true. Many years later, he's like, Santo Daime is not Christians using ayahuasca. It's ayahuasca using Christians.
Say a bit more.
Yeah. So, it's like, it's interesting. So you're in this community of people, and like their whole relationship to Christianity, to the medicine, is through like, many, different kinds of, many like multiple hour long works, trabajos, related to, some type of Christian, practice, or, yeah, like, inario, like you're going through like the entire hymnal, of a particular person that they received from, the astral, that reflects a particular teaching that is like pretty much Judeo-Christian in its foundation. So let's just say, like, needless to say, all that ayahuasca drinking, whether it's ayahuasca or Santo Daime, started to open up my channels, intuitive channels, enormously. So my dreaming state was just like really vivid, and quite, everything it was almost like being partially in the spirit world. Like, half my body was in like the waking world, half my body was in the spirit world. And I started to receive a lot of intuitive messages. And one of the intuitive messages that was coming through from the forest around me, I started to communicate with nature, with like plants and medicinal plants specifically, because in the Santo Daime community of Sotomayor, there's a center of forest medicine, and they would teach people how to work with flower essences. And one of the ways, and so they actually like had training programs on how to communicate with the plants. So started to like, communicate with the plants and the nature around me, and actually receive messages from nature. And that one of the main messages coming through was, your mission, should you choose to accept, is to master emerging technologies so that new technology can preserve indigenous wisdom, so that ancient wisdom can benefit the modern world, and new technology can benefit indigenous people.
Wow, what a clear message. Pretty specific, no?
Very clear. And let me tell you this, I didn't know how to do anything online. So it was just kind of like, what do you want me to do? Like the only thing I could do was send email, like hit send. I didn't know how to like build web pages, or like work with databases, or, custom server installation, or, any of, with social media or any of these things. Like, it was like, okay, all right, I know what I'm going to do. So after the 4 months, I went back to San Francisco. I started to report to duty, tried to build my first website. That was really painful. I built it on a content management system called Joomla, which lost out to WordPress. There was no, user manual at the time, because it was like, like a user generated community thing. So by the time I was done with the website, like, 2 months later, they're like, oh, we came up with a manual now. I'm like, I could have used that. Like, so built the website, and then because there were all kinds of like weird things, like I didn't know how to like upload an image with the right size. So I'd upload an image and the page would go, and I was like, fuck, like I don't know what I'm doing. And so I went out to all the technology meetups that were happening in the early 2000s, right before, the web 2.0 phenomena, like, when YouTube and Twitter and like all these companies and Facebook started to emerge. Facebook didn't even exist yet. At that time, it was still like a dorm project. And so I went to all these like web 2.0 meetups to meet with developers and just be like, hey, so my web page looks all wonky. Can you help me fix it? And then I was immersed into the world of social media, Web 2.0, started to, because I was going to all these events, right? So I ended up like becoming a blogger covering these events for like a, startup PR company. Who started a blog called Bubblicious. And then I was then signing up for all these apps and like, oh, like this, startup, party, this, new application, is it a winner? So I'd like create like a, profile like Flickr. So like, here's what Flickr does, and then I ended up getting an email out of the blue from the person who ended up being my boss at Salesforce.com. And he was like, hey, we're doing interesting things with Enterprise 2.0. I'd like to invite you to, come in for an interview.
Hmm.
Yeah. I didn't
Right.
even apply for this job. They made a job for me.
How did that circle back to coaching then? Let's bring in the coaching element, because I get a sense for how you went on that path, and it's really cool to see how you took the message, the invitation, and just made that your path and committed to it and threw the energy at it. So how did the coaching angle come in for you?
Yeah, so I went into this job with the intention. Again, all about intentions, right? I'm like, okay, I'm going to earn while I learn, because my whole MO in corporate is to figure out how to make money online so I can go back to the Amazon and not have to like be in a scenario where like I have to quit a job and then get a new job and then quit a job and get a new job, right? It's like I can make money online while I'm in the Amazon. So so I ended up in corporate for, a few years. And then at a certain point, I just kind of like, played the fiddle till the last string broke. And then I left, and then went straight back to the Amazon again. I went back, 7 years later, went back. And then, and I was a consultant, an SEO consultant. And then, I kind of like realized that being a bespoke consultant was a whole lot of hustle. And I, got warmed up to the idea of selling packages that, basically the same thing that like I could take all my clients through, right? Rather than like, try to like write up a custom proposal for, a new company and then like do like, work that is like bespoke and not replicatable. So that's when I made a shift from being consultant to a coach, where it's like I've got a transformational process that I take people through, right? And then, and then you enroll people and then bring people through that same process. So then you create that process and then you sell it over and over again. And as you serve people in that way, in that, through that process, you develop more assets, more, training videos, more handouts, and it becomes your body of work. Right. Mm-hmm. So that was a journey that I started to go on when I realized that, working with companies on completely individualized consulting packages that I would then have to like spend hours writing a proposal for, that, sometimes like, when people say, oh, give me a proposal, they're telling you that to get you like to get you to go away. Or to like, it's like a really
give me something I can say no to.
yeah, it's kind of like, just send me a proposal, I'll take a look at it, right? It's kind of like a really dismissive, they're not really that interested in hiring you, right? And then it sets you up for a whole world of work, and you send the proposal and then you're just like, oh yeah, no. And so I did enough of those, and I was just like, you know what? No, there's a better way. Like, I'm not going to do that anymore. Like, these proposals take me hours to like really think about how to like create a bespoke, package, and look at a person's like, online environment and research their keywords, and then like figure out like what strategy we're going to do to get them to like increase their Google rankings. Like, no.
Right. So to jump in there, so coaching at the time was actually to get away from the bespoke relationships and based on what you had learned, but to package that up so you can take people through a process where they learn about this without you having to make it bespoke.
Yeah, like to take people through a repeatable process.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And
so mind you, this was also in the very beginning of the coaching industry. So it was actually really hard to find a coach back then.
What time are we in right now? What year?
We're in like 2010, 2011.
Right.
And was there already an overlap between the plant medicine and your corporate work, or was it still divided?
It was still quite divided. Yeah, it was still quite divided. So Yeah. And so basically, I kind of went on a coaching business journey, becoming a coach in different sectors. So I shifted from, high tech to green biz, and then wasn't really into green biz because it was mostly like solar companies that were my clients. So then went into like, social entrepreneurship, but like social entrepreneurship's not really a sector because, I mean, like there are different industry sectors of which, like a hotel could be a social enterprise, and, a clothing company could also be a social enterprise. So social entrepreneurship actually wasn't its own niche, right? And there was a whole, like, aspect of, raising social venture capital and all of that. So it was not quite a coaching, friendly space to be in. Then I moved into transformational coaching, lifestyle business type of thing. And then the entire time I was trying to make that connection with plant medicines and psychedelics because that was what I was deeply interested in. But honestly, I just wasn't sure how monetizable psychedelics was, because remember, this was all still very early. And this is before like, psychedelic coaching, and training programs kind of like exploded, right? And so I just spent this time like skilling up and learning all the different like launch strategies, email list building strategies, joint venture partnering strategies in order to build up a coaching type of business, which is a very specific type of business model. And then at a certain point, and then like applying everything that I was learning towards creating a platform. At a certain point in like 2015, I decided to create a psychedelic podcast. So it started off as a podcast. And then I built it out to be an actual like full-blown website with blog articles and, ebooks and, all kinds of resources there. But it started off as a podcast. And and then it was like, okay, well, this is what I'm passionate about. So I'm just going to like go into it and, see where it evolves. And then, little did I know that it was entirely possible to make money online in psychedelics and plant medicines without selling any drugs. Mm-hmm. Really through content marketing.
Yeah. Can I just I want to get really curious about your coaching. Is your view on coaching, is that framework still the same of taking somebody through a certain process, something that is packaged up that isn't bespoke, or has your view on coaching evolved in some way or changed in some way?
Yeah, so what I would consider to be a really powerful model for a lot of people that are wanting to grow a coaching business is to do hybrid. So hybrid means that you have a group program where you still have your process, right? So it's still good to take people through a process that will move them from point A to point B. And there's going to be some people that are a little bit further ahead and other people that are like, right in the beginning stages. So a hybrid model where you offer access to a group program, but also one-to-one private mentoring can be really powerful so that you can also tailor, whatever support that you offer to your clients in a bit more of a bespoke way, but you're still taking them through the process.
Mm-hmm. And you know the process. What's the process that you take people on?
Okay, well, let's see. So I think it really depends on. So EntheoNation has a number of different courses and programs, and so it just depends on what that outcome of the program actually is, right? So it depends on, what the program is. But if, for example, somebody was wanting to work with me on growing their coaching business from a place of random word of mouth referrals, which is it's a great place to be, that you have people that would refer you clients, and speak highly about you. That's a really powerful way to, have to attract clients, but it's not scalable and it's not predictable, right? So if you were wanting to work with me on growing your coaching business, building up your online platform to be able to start to establish a presence that attracts people to your email list, so that they would be moved through your funnel, so to speak, your content marketing funnel, then I would take them through a process of creating that funnel. So my expertise these days is I'm a full stack internet marketer. That is what that particular, the expertise that I have is best encapsulated by that particular role. So what does that mean? So basically that means that you have the knowledge, a full stack internet marketer has the knowledge and the expertise to understand and to develop strategies, techniques, and methods to get people to see your offer online and to move them through a customer journey so that at the end of that customer journey, which is a journey of experiencing your content that transforms, that solves their problem, that builds trust, as they go through that journey of web pages and content, then at the end of that journey, they are more inclined to open up their wallet and give you money. So getting eyeballs to see your offer and getting the owners of those eyeballs to open up their wallet and give you money. And that involves understanding strategies and the way that the online, infrastructure and space works. So online front end, but then also what needs to happen on the back end as well. So that the process of moving through that customer journey is streamlined, fast, and efficient. So back end means software stack, your technology stack, your server infrastructure as well, because page speed is really important, and some of that needs to be controlled on the back end through your through your server infrastructure and your cloud management, content management through cloud services and through caching. I mean, it gets highly technical, right? Mm-hmm. So if you were a coach wanting to receive online business mentoring, then I would take you through the process of creating your transformational offer, and then all the different assets you need to create to lead people from the first moment they see your offer online, mm-hmm. Into your content journey, and then through your shopping cart. Right. And into your customer members portal, basically.
Right. So the principles can be applied for pretty much anybody who wants to build a coaching business, and also many of the same principles are the same for people who want to build any online business. I wonder how psychedelics come into that mix when you combine them.
Yeah, so if I were to talk about the Plant Spirit School Integration Coach Certification Program, which is our flagship program at EntheoNation, that customer journey, so our ideal client is somebody who considers themselves to be a plant medicine person, for whom ceremony is a way of life. And they highly resonate with working with natural plant medicines like ayahuasca or psychoactive fungi like psilocybin, but working with these sacred medicines in an intentional, ritualistic or ceremonial way. And my ideal clients for this certification program are people that want to step up to a higher position of leadership in their communities. So they might already be involved in an underground plant medicine circle or an entheogenic church. Maybe they're already guiding their friends or holding, small friends and family types of, group journeys. They want to be able to work with supporting entheogenic clients, but do so in a way that is much more shamanic than it is clinical. And then they also really resonate with, a culture-based approach. So the Plant Spirit School, like our ethos is around sacred reciprocity. We find it to be really important to be able to bring indigenous perspectives to the global north, to the west, to the psychedelic renaissance. We have faculty who are indigenous wisdom keepers, and we partner with indigenous wisdom keepers for our plant medicine retreats. That would be the practicum retreat that the students would also have an opportunity to participate in. Mm-hmm. So many of the students, their transformational journey as they move through this program. So a lot of our students want to understand what psychedelic integration actually is. Right. So the foundation of this transformation is to really understand, so our curriculum is set up where people will learn both the aspects about psychedelic medicine and how this is evolving in the psychedelic renaissance, so the Western approach, but not so in depth, in that they're going to get into like clinical research studies or a lot of, academia or theoretical frameworks that many of the psychedelic training programs are offering to their student cohort, a student body, of which, so many of these psychedelic training programs, their entry criteria is oriented towards people who are have the backgrounds in psychotherapy. So they either have a graduate degree or an undergraduate degree in psychotherapy. Maybe they're a licensed nurse practitioner, a physician, or a mental health counselor. So there's all these academic criteria in order to join, some of the better, more prestigious psychedelic training programs. In Plant Spirit School, we don't have that entry criteria because we don't believe that academic background necessarily makes you more likely to be a safe, qualified, or good integration provider. What it takes to be a safe, qualified, and good integration provider doesn't have anything to do with your academic credentials. You could just as easily be a physician who's abusive, So like
doesn't not make it somewhat more likely? I mean, I know it's excluding a lot of really qualified people who bring in a wide variety of transferable skills. But I guess the idea behind this is that on some level we can create some degree, maybe not of certainty, but like we make it more likely that people bring in relevant knowledge, right?
Like what makes a good integration coach a good integration coach? So what do the people need to carry with them to go into your program to become a good integration coach, if that's not academical background?
So what does it take to be a psychedelic integration provider that's safe, qualified, and good? So, my perspective on this, I'm really wary about the psychiatric and medical industry gatekeeping that's happening right now in the psychedelic renaissance, that has a narrative that in order to be qualified to work with somebody that is integrating entheogenic states, or even in a journey, you need to be a psychotherapist in training. And I say this because many of these medicines that are part of the psychedelic renaissance right now were shared with us by the indigenous people. Psilocybin, ayahuasca, DMT, iboga, ibogaine, like these were ancestral medicines. And the indigenous wisdom keepers, many of them don't have college degrees, and they never needed academic training as psychotherapists in order to serve their community for generations, if not at least a millennia. So there is this kind of like, narrative control and like power grab, trying to establish this idea in Western society that, if you're only qualified if you're a psychotherapist, a doctor, or like a nurse, or some type of, medical, or practitioner or mental health, practitioner. And I can understand why, in our culture, we might gravitate towards that because we value Western, academia and college degrees and all of this, type of stuff, but honestly, like if you've spent any time in the psychedelic space right now, there are facilitators that are still serving people, that are still continuing on business as usual, who are abusive, who have several negligent deaths like surrounding their practice, who are physicians. And, who have been accused of like fraud, who have been accused of, sexual abuse and misconduct.
Oh, yeah. It's clear that you can be very well qualified and have the kind of ticking the boxes and be a very bad practitioner. There's so many bad therapists out there. Not necessarily an argument against like asking people to do a certain level of training or education. I think the level of training and education doesn't necessarily have to come through the academic route. But I think to learn and to study something and to immerse yourself in something in an ethical, maybe methodological and structured way, a reflected practice, maybe even a supervised one, I think it's really helpful. Not perhaps necessary in all cases to do good work. There's plenty of people doing amazing work without any level of academic education. But I think the learning process is a really important one, especially when we work with something like psychedelics, where very quickly you can be in a very vulnerable state.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I think, also on the flip side, right, there are many aspects of Western culture that the indigenous wisdom keepers are not familiar with. We have a hell of a lot we're a very highly prescribed society. And there's also a lot of stresses and neuroses, whereas like somebody who lives, in the South, in the Amazon, for example, they have a different way of relating to these medicines, right? They have a more integrated culture as well that like respects and honors and, accepts using these medicines as entirely like natural and part of the culture. Whereas in the global North, there isn't, that general level of integration or acceptance in our culture. So it can be a bit of a discombobulation, right, if you're working with psychedelics. So I think there needs to be some kind of training. Even for indigenous wisdom keepers that might be working with Westerners, and sometimes they're not going to go through that training because that's not their role. But then it's the role of the person that is the bridge, like usually the retreat organizer or the venue host or whoever that is inviting the indigenous person to come hold ceremony for their space. That person needs to be trained. And so, what does that training look like? So essentially, you can have all kinds of incredible modalities and frameworks that you might have learned in transformational coaching. And that's really important. That's great. But there are specific aspects around working with people in entheogenic states that it's important to be aware of that is not transferable if, let's say, you did your certification in neuro-linguistic programming, or if you did some other type of training program like emotional freedom technique, like EFT, NLP can be really great modalities to bring into your integration practice. But it's really important, first and foremost, the two things that you really need to know if you want to work with entheogenic clients. Number one, psychedelic harm reduction. What does that mean? That means understanding drug contraindications, for example, and even understanding, like, if you are providing some type of medical assessment for your client, let's say, you are helping mentor them into finding their ideal facilitator or retreat center, or let's say if you are, helping them get ready for an upcoming plant medicine retreat, or let's say you are an integration provider that is also a guide. And so you're working with your clients to prepare them for their upcoming session or journey or retreat. that you yourself are leading, there's a certain amount of, understanding, what their history is in terms of their health, as well as what kind of medications they might be on, and understanding if there's any kind of contraindications. And if you don't understand the contraindications between what they've been prescribed and the psychedelic medicine that they'll be working with, because there's so many prescriptions now, then to know how to refer that person out to a medical professional or a pharmacologist.
Yeah. Can I jump in there with something? Because we mentioned a few ways to approach this. You mentioned coaching, you mentioned mentoring, you mentioned knowing pharmacology through the kind of screening process. There's some medical knowledge involved. You mentioned the courses being therapy courses or therapy trainings. You mentioned EMDR, which is often a therapeutic technique. So I wonder if we could just quickly, before we go back to the question of what does a coach need to work with psychedelics, can we put a frame around these different practices? Or are they all coming together? Are they all integrated when you work with people? Because what's coaching? What's mentoring? What's the pharmacology aspect of it? Or do you integrate them all when you work with people?
I'm getting there. Okay. So basically, the way that I see it is you need your foundation. There's two aspects to the foundation that you need. One is psychedelic harm reduction, and the second is trauma-informed care. Those are the two things that you need if you want to be a coach or a therapist working with entheogenic clients. Mm-hmm. Right. And then there's all the modalities that you bring into your practice, like the EMDR, like the EFT, like the NLP, like whatever, like all the different, there's so many, wonderful frameworks and techniques and tools that you can use. But if you're working with people who are going to be journeying or integrating entheogenic states, that it's important to understand psychedelic harm reduction and understand trauma, because psychedelics will tend to bring up memories of past trauma in order for the person to heal them. And you need to understand what's going on and how it's showing up so that you can support them and not inadvertently trigger and re-traumatize them, or traumatize them in a different way.
So when you say support, because this is really good, this is really important as well. And Julie, I know it seems to have a question on there, but I trauma informed, healing the trauma is often what people come to psychedelics for. And an ongoing question I have is, what is the coach's role? Is coaching something that supports, that acknowledges the trauma, but helps people move forward despite the trauma? If somebody wants to heal the actual trauma and really go in on the trauma because those doors have opened during the experience, for me, that's outside of coaching, because coaches don't heal that trauma. But I know a lot of coaches do offer support and hold space for people to heal the trauma. So I think there's a difference between trauma in being trauma informed, understanding trauma and its triggers, and being trauma informed to an extent where you actually focus on the trauma. Do you know what I mean?
Well, can I answer your question in maybe in a different way? So there is this misconception that psychedelics will heal your trauma. I would not say that's the case. You heal your trauma. So psychedelics will tend to make you aware of trauma that needs to be healed, and show you how you can heal your trauma, and show you that you have trauma that needs to be healed that might be showing up in all these different ways that are causing you to behave in, or have like limited beliefs or limited, habits or destructive behaviors, right? So it will show you how the trauma is manifesting in your life that might be limiting you or keeping you from having, from being fully expressed and from having the life that you truly desire for yourself. Now, the work of healing the trauma is on you. Now, how are you going to find support to heal that trauma? So for a lot of people, they don't see, for most people, we don't see our blind spots. So we can go into a ceremony and just be like, oh my God, I had this revelation that I had all this childhood trauma that I didn't even know about, and how it's like really impacting me. Like, so for example, there was a time when I didn't have much space in my life, and I was going to ayahuasca ceremonies in the weekend, and then I was going straight from the weekend into my corporate job, and it was like a very full-on corporate job. And then all this trauma stuff was coming up that I didn't understand was actually a result of me going to ayahuasca ceremony every weekend. And I would start getting really triggered when I'd see like classmates share photos of when we were in school, because my time in school was really traumatizing. And I'd get really angry. I'm like, don't send me that photo, and then I was like, oh my God, like I had so much trauma from being in school at that time. Right. But then like, I didn't actually have much support. I didn't know I needed that support in order to heal that trauma and to look at that. Right. So I just kind of like, didn't know why I was having those reactions, was really focused on my career. And it was only like 10 years later, I was like, oh my God, that was all coming up for me to heal. And, what a shame that I didn't actually seek support at that time to work with somebody on what happened back then. Right. So this is where it's really important to have somebody, ideally an ideal integration provider, whether that person's a coach or a therapist, whether you're trying to achieve a desired outcome through a coaching, framework, or if you're trying to resolve like an emotional, psychological problem through the support of a therapist. The most important work around healing trauma takes place after the ceremony.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say is the most important things that people need to carry when they want to go into your program? Because I suppose there are many people out there who are doing ceremony after ceremony, and they worked on their traumas, and they feel like, okay, now I know how it works, so I can provide integration. Where is the step for you to accept somebody into your program? When do you see, or how do you see that somebody is really carrying the good things that people need for being an integration coach?
Yeah, so the Plant Spirit School is a coach training program. So what we aim to do is to provide the foundation of psychedelic harm reduction and trauma-informed care that plant medicine people are not receiving because they do not qualify for the prestigious psychedelic training programs that are being offered because they don't have the academic credentials. But we do, different from some of these psychedelic training programs. So academic credentials are like the bar of entry for these programs, but psychedelic experience is not. And so that actually has elicited a lot of criticism in the psychedelic community around, how is it, even, acceptable that somebody can, graduate from college or be a established physician who's never had their own psychedelic experience, go into a training program and become certified as a psychedelic therapist when they've never had a psychedelic experience.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one that surfaces often on this podcast, actually. And I'm super curious about that, because the argument, as I understand it, is that if somebody works with psychosis as a therapist, we don't require them to have had an episode of psychosis. If somebody works with bereavement as a therapist, we don't require them to have lost a loved one. Because the process of working with somebody is usually a phenomenological one. It's exploring somebody else's experience rather than understanding them from the position of my own experience. So holding space for someone and exploring what it was like for them and how they want to integrate that experience doesn't necessarily require me to have had my own experiences. Personally, I think it helps a lot to understand the landscape. And there's this argument that you can only take people so far as you've traveled yourself. I have some issues with that, but I think it certainly helps the relationship and the connection and the trust from the client into the practitioner when they know you've journeyed quite far. And I think it helps a lot that you have done the journey, whether that's through psychedelics or some other sort of journey, that you know who you are so that you can hold a space in a very grounded way. But I'm challenging the idea that somebody has to have had all the psychedelic experiences in order to facilitate learning and growth for somebody coming out of one, because the experience is always so different. My experience is going to be so different from your experience, and my experience is going to be so different from my next experience. So I can't really make assumptions based on my experience of what's going on for this person in front of me, because they might have a completely different experience. Do you know what I mean?
I agree, and I also disagree. So, one of the things that I often see is people who have never worked with ayahuasca, for example, or done any psychedelics, make claims that it's just like being in deep meditation. No, it is very, very different. So the psychedelic state of mind, the entheogenic state, is very distinct. And then, of course, the different medicines also have a different flavor of consciousness expansion, which is also, different between the medicines. And everybody's going to have their own psychedelic experience as well. But there's one kind of like foundational experience that I would say of the psychedelic experience. There's a common shared psychedelic experience that once you've had it, then it's kind of like, you've moved into that club or that world, so to speak. And it's kind of like hard. It's ineffable. It's
the same for everybody. Like there's a center of that's the same for everybody. That's shared. That you're saying.
Yeah, people describe it in different ways, but you know what you're talking about. You know what it is, right? Like, even though like your experience might be different from mine, but like, there's certain shared things like, LSD, and like, if you do enough, good, strong LSD, those are the trails, like you'll see trails, right? So that's a common experience. So there's certain common experiences, DMT, like, entities, like that's a common experience. So you start to like see that there's a whole phenomenology of the psychedelic landscape that, like if you haven't experienced that, then there's a barrier between you as the provider and your client.
Why is it important for you to experience that when you work with someone?
Because then you know what the client is talking about.
Do you really though?
You make assumptions about what they're going through that actually could be harmful for them.
Yeah, see, what I'm hearing is that I would be making an assumption that I know what it's like for them to experience that, because I understand the shared experience, and I think that's probably true, that there's certain elements that you resonate with more. But I wouldn't want to claim that I know what's going on for you because we both had an experience of entities. Right. I would want to bracket that.
It's not claiming that right? But it's kind of like having that shared rapport, right? Mm-hmm. So let me give you another example. Let's say, and this is, this is an experience that I've had, so if you've had psychedelic experiences and traumas coming up, and then you go and find like, a conventional therapist or a coach, like, so, back in the day, in college, I was introduced to LSD and had the most transcendent experience of universal love and unity ever in an underground rave on K Street in Washington, D.C. And it was just like, I never knew that it was possible to even feel that. And I kept, wanting to go back there to that feeling of cosmic unity. But then, it was like every time I would do the LSD, it would never quite bring me back to that first trip. And then I was starting to feel destabilized because there was all this stuff that I'd never worked on, all this trauma from my past, like, racial oppression and violence, that was kind of like, very closely linked to a period of time when I experienced a lot of suicidal ideation from being harassed, growing up in a colony in Hong Kong, and when I experienced a lot of racial violence as a child. And so I went to University Health Services, and I went to sign up for, therapy. And then I met with a therapist and was like, I'm having, some trouble with suicidal ideation. I experienced a lot of like harassment and bullying as a kid. I'm also, doing LSD. And then he looked at me, he was like, LSD is bad. And I was like, no, it's not. Like, how can something that makes you feel that, that feeling of completeness and wholeness and universal love be bad? And so that's where it gets a little tricky, right? So maybe you could have somebody that supports you in some type of desired outcome that you might be wanting to achieve in the period of time after the ceremony, right? Mm-hmm. And you're working with somebody and they're not specifically an integration provider, but you're working with them because you need to do ABC or XYZ. And you want to take advantage of that opportunity between ceremonies to work on that. So let me give you another example. So there was a time in my life where my business partner broke into my house and stole a bunch of stuff. And that was like super stressful for me. Like I had learned in that period of time that from his family, because I, was surprised at what the hell happened. And I hired a private investigator. I'm like, who is this person? Like, I thought I knew him, but I guess I don't. And so I ended up learning some more about him, that he was actually recovering crack addict. And so he had actually fallen off the wagon, so to speak, and started getting back into his habit, and then ended up breaking into my house, to be able to feed his habit. And I found a crack pipe in my house. That was super stressful, and I was making a big move in my life, and it was really traumatizing. And I, needed to be in a place of full strength in this big transition that I was making, leaving San Francisco and becoming a digital nomad. And so I decided, I'm like, look, I'm going to I was in a period of time when I was doing solo ayahuasca journeys by myself in nature. I don't recommend that you do that unless you're very experienced. But I decided that I was going to go solo journey with ayahuasca. And in between, I was going to work with an NLP coach. And he was not a psychedelic integration provider, but he was psychedelic friendly. And he also had psychedelic experiences, so he knew what all of that was about, but he didn't necessarily, need to have all the background of trauma-informed care and psychedelic harm reduction, because I was hiring him to get me through a process of forgiving my ex-business partner. And
right, so you had the psychedelic harm reduction covered, you knew what you were doing, and then you used the coaching in order to understand what was going on there and release something.
Yes. So I so I already kind of knew my intention with this person was, I don't need you to be a psychedelic integration coach. I just need you to do the NLP on me and to help me get over this thing. And it was remarkably effective. Within 6 months, I completely forgave him, 1,000%. And all the triggers of, the waking up in the middle of the night, I slept with a knife next to my bed. I was like, I just felt really unsafe. Right. And so all of that was just gone. And, and and actually, kind of arrived at a place of deep care for him. Deep care. I was just feeling I hope you are able to find the help that you need to recover.
But that sounds like an argument for, or a case for, the coach doesn't necessarily have to have traveled this or that far. They just need to be psychedelics friendly, so they're not in the way, having to bracket that all the time.
It depends on what you're looking for. So if you want somebody, if somebody is billing themselves as an integration coach, you would want them to have had some type of foundational psychedelic harm reduction training in trauma-informed care. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'd say that is essential, because there's a lot of people that are, because the barrier to entry for coaching is very low. Anybody can call themselves an integration coach. Yeah. So I don't have, I have an integration training program, but I don't call myself an integration coach, because I am the program director and the curator of the program. The people that are teaching the integration modules in my program, they're integration therapists and coaches. I'm kind of like the bus that gets you there. So I'm the publisher and the educator, right? At the educational platform. So I would say, if you want integration support, then find somebody who has the harm reduction training and trauma-informed care. Okay. If you are wanting to work on a specific thing between your, after your ceremony or between ceremonies, and you don't need an integration coach, you just want somebody that's going to help you get over your divorce faster, then find a person that's going to help you get over your divorce faster, who might be psychedelic friendly, so that you can talk to them about the vision that you had or the realization that you had in your ceremony about your husband and how that relates to, your past life, your past, childhood trauma, so that they don't think that you're, crazy and want to get you on like meds. Or if you're telling them about like, oh yeah, and then this entity like, came out of the forest in this journey and shared with me in my past life, the reason why I'm having this now, like, and then they're just like, I think you're like hearing voices and you need to be on psychotic drugs.
Oh, but I don't think a good therapist or coach would do that if they have a basic understanding of how psychedelics work.
That's why, like, so that it depends on your intention. So if you're going to work with somebody to help you with XYZ and you don't need for them to be an integration coach, make sure they're psychedelic friendly. Yeah.
Julia, what are you curious about?
I'm curious about, what do you think, how's what are the challenges at this time for future and now integration coaches here in Europe and in the US, because you now have both views. So we often have people only from the US, and I think that's a different thing because the legal statuses around in the US are different than here in Europe. So what do you think when people are ready and they've gone through the program, what kind of challenges could they face as well?
So is your question related to, let's say a person goes through integration training, regardless of whose program they're in, and then they start to work with clients, what kind of challenges might come up? Okay, so primarily there's two kinds of challenges, right? So the number one challenge, which is a challenge that I aim to resolve through the Plant Spirit School, is not knowing how to actually establish a coaching business. So many transformational coaching programs and many of these psychedelic training programs will teach you all the modalities around psychedelic integration and recovery, or psychedelic integration, what that is. And then at the end of the program, you might have your certificate of completion. And then it's like, oh, okay, so where do I get my clients from? Right? Where do I get my clients from? And so there might be any number of directories, but I think, anybody who's been around, as a, solo practitioner or any type of, service provider, just because you have your profile on a directory doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to attract any clients. Like, you can literally put your profile on every single like LinkedIn gets a whole, bunch of traffic. There's all kinds of like different kinds of, there's a psychedelic.support, for example, there's many different kinds of psychable.com. But that's like putting up your shingle, right? But yeah, how do you go about attracting clients? So the foundation of creating your coaching business is also an aspect of the training that we offer in Plant Spirit School. The second issue that people run into is what to do if there are certain kinds of cases that come up.
Like what?
And how to resolve them. Yeah. So certain cases that might come up and how to resolve them.
Do you have an example for that?
Yeah. So, for example, my client started to get tinnitus after their 5-MeO DMT session. Does anybody know how to resolve tinnitus?
Oh, what a question for a coach.
Things like that, or like, here's another one. So this is where it gets interesting, right? Because we are familiar with ayahuasca and iboga and psilocybin and, wachuma as being like shamanic medicines. A psychedelic therapist shared with me, she was like, there's one person, a therapist in her community that doesn't know what to do because one of their clients who has been receiving ketamine infusion therapy is now saying that they've been possessed by a demon. How do you address that in the clinical model? There really isn't, like you can talk about it with your therapist, but like in a shamanic model, you would do an extraction or like do some type of purification ritual, or get a specialist to do an exorcism. But like in a, medical clinical model, like, how do you address entities?
Well, there's plenty of ways, right? In the medical clinical model, that way would not be my favorite, but there's plenty of ways in therapy how you would acknowledge something like that and work with it without undermining that this is real for this person right now. I think there's very good ways to work with it. But when I have those questions, and I see that sometimes in coaching forums, maybe not about entities and possession, but I see questions in coaching forums outside the psychedelic space where a coach might ask, oh, it's session 3 with a client and they fell into deep depression. How do I coach them out of it? And I'm like, well, you don't. You post this because you don't know what you're doing. And I don't think coaching is the way to help somebody who fell into a deep depression. That's the point where you have the conversation about how they can find the right kind of support, which is clearly not you because you don't know how to deal with this. Right. So if somebody
referring out, exactly.
It's so important to know where our lines are as coaches. And I think when we work in psychedelic spaces, I reckon when it comes to coaches, those lines will be crossed not very quickly, but much more often than it would outside of the psychedelic space. So that it's so important for a coach to know how far am I willing and able to go with this client. And if somebody comes up after the experience and a big trauma door has opened, and you're not someone who focuses in on the trauma to help somebody heal it, don't attempt to do the kind of work. I mean, you might be super well-intentioned and with the kindest heart want to help this person and hold space. But if some of those doors open and this client feels really fragile and vulnerable right now, then think about, what do I bring to this space as a person, as a professional? And most coaching modalities, most coaching trainings, as trauma-informed as they might be, I don't think they equip you well enough to help somebody heal trauma or address trauma or unpack trauma. We can acknowledge trauma and maybe help somebody to find the right kind of support if they want to go through that door. But not everybody needs to go through their trauma doors. They can also understand that now and from a quite resourced position, help create something moving forward. But if that space comes and somebody says, I've realized that and I need to unpack it a bit, I don't. My coaching is not the right tool for that. Maybe I could, but I don't really want to. And if that's important, I would absolutely have that conversation about where can you find a therapist that you trust, who understands trauma deeply and is willing to go on a weekly journey for you to unpack that.
Yes, I agree with you.
Where do we go next?
Yes. So, being able to refer out, is really important, or, to seek, to be able to seek counsel from your friends or elders. That's also really important. So to be able to have, access to elders that are able to, provide some type of like case review, should things come up and you don't really understand, how to address the issue, and then maybe be able to provide some type of, mirror or feedback mechanism to really understand if you need to refer your client out.
Mm-hmm. I was curious about, you mentioned the modalities that are taught within either your program or in other training programs. I'm curious about the different integration modalities or methodologies and how that would work like in practice. So if somebody had a psychedelic experience, and maybe it depends on what they wanted to work on, what their outcome was, if it's trauma related, or maybe if it's this new business idea came up, or I think I connected to my purpose and I need to make some changes in my life, or I felt this deep unifying love for everything and I'm in this job where I'm not me. How do you take these insights and what does that integration journey look like? What are the kind of tools you offer or the frameworks that you use in that journey?
So can I share with you a bit of an elephant in the room?
Of course.
So if you think the psychedelic renaissance is a Wild West, so is psychedelic integration. And I've stolen that quote, or paraphrased that quote from a colleague of mine whose work that I deeply appreciate. His name is Jules Evans. He's a philosopher and he's also a writer that writes very frequently on comments on the psychedelic sector, as well as conspiracy theories and cults. And the article was a recent article by Vice about, it's now we need to look at the downside of psychedelics. Because there is not enough focus on the downside. But here's the thing, so I think we've arrived at a place in the psychedelic renaissance where there's increasing consensus that no, psychedelics are not a silver bullet. You are not going to get an ayahuasca miracle. And that if you want to increase your likelihood of having a positive outcome from your psychedelic experience, you really need to have integration support. And the longer, and more intentional the integration work that you do is, the more likely the positive outcome that you're going to experience. Because many people, even if they are administered by a licensed professional with all the credentials in a clinical environment, with the right dosage, very safe, very well supported, many people still have negative outcomes from their psychedelic experience. And we don't really know enough about why that is and how to address it. Now, there is a general consensus in the psychedelic sector that integration is the key. But what does that mean? Because, there is a general understanding of what psychedelic integration is. It involves, being able to weave the insights and the emotional realizations from your journey into actionable positive outcomes in your day-to-day life, something like that, right? But nobody really agrees what integration methodologies work for specific conditions. For example, there haven't been, our Western medical system. We look towards like double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical studies with large, population sets, for example, in order to be able to come to a decision as to like, oh, is this thing like efficacious or not? Right? There isn't enough evidence as to what integration framework is most effective in addressing psychotic breaks, right? So basically, we see this landscape where, for the people that are offering integration support, everyone's got their own philosophy, their own framework, and their own techniques. Mm-hmm. So where this industry is going is this industry is going to start niching down. Because at a certain point, people are not going to start looking for integration specialists. They're going to look for an integration specialist that focuses on helping single mothers with young children get over their divorce faster.
Mm-hmm. So it's the coaching business in general. Yes. Just with the psychedelic in front.
Mm-hmm. It's the coaching business with psychedelic education.
Mm-hmm. So how did you choose what to include in your training? Because there's some, it sounds like there's some integration modalities that you teach, or is there?
Yeah. So, well, again, like I said, their integration. What does that mean? Integration modalities. Yeah. So, for example, in the program curriculum, we have a hybrid model that focuses on both, Western, Western therapeutic models, and then, shamanic ancestral frameworks as well. So, for the first month, we're looking at, the psychedelics and behavior change. So what do we understand in terms of, how psychedelics work for healing and, what neuroscience, shows us around neuroplasticity. So it's an introduction to psychedelic medicine and therapy so that the students understand the evolution of the space, but without like the heavy emphasis on clinical research and, theoretical frameworks. We have some neuroscience so that they understand like, some of the more recent studies and, why psychedelics can be really efficacious in helping people resolve problems or achieve desired outcomes due to the increased neuroplasticity. We also include, shamanic frameworks as well, because our program is focused mostly on people that are plant medicine people that are mostly, part of what's known as global medicine culture. So in global medicine culture, which is expanding as, as the psychedelic renaissance expands, there's also this global shamanic revival where there are ceremonies that are just, and retreats that are, kind of shamanic in container that are increasing around the world. So if you go to retreatguru.com, my colleague Cameron, who is the CEO of Retreat Guru, told me that literally, the psychedelic segment of his, platform has basically doubled, increased between 50 to 70% over the last few years. There's more and more psychedelic retreat listings, even in places where the psychedelics are illegal, right? So, we're teaching people how to navigate this space. And in this space of increased ceremonies and, more facilitators, the paradigm is shamanic. So we're looking at principles of core shamanism and how to, use tools such as soul retrieval, and different types of Amazonian techniques around clearing energy, for example, so that people can have skills that they can bring to their plant medicine community, and so that they can be better guardians and angels, in these ceremonies.
Could you give us an example of how that might be applied by a coach in an integration session?
So, for example, if somebody is, feeling that they, had, they still have negative energy coming out of the ceremony, then a coach that is going through the program would be able to learn how to do apply mapacho and do a soplada and do and work with agua de Florida, for example. And be able to.
Can you tell us what these are for people who are not familiar with the terms?
Okay, so for example, mapacho is a sacred tobacco. It is the genus of tobacco is Nicotiana rustica, which is a different kind of tobacco than what you find in cigarettes. It has, a much higher nicotine quantity. So I'd say it's maybe 20 times stronger. I'm not entirely sure about the number, but it's considerably more nicotine than regular cigarettes. And so in the Amazon, this kind of tobacco is sacred and it's used as a medicine. And then the smoke itself is used to purify. So you would basically have a mapacho roll, and then you would smoke it and then blow the smoke over yourself. Or if somebody is, cleansing you with tobacco smoke, they would take their mapacho, roll and then, blow the smoke over yourself. This kind of thing can also be done energetically. People do this, through Zoom as well. So then basically through distance cleansing. So that would be one way. And because the people that we're training are, medicine ceremony people, these are skills that they can bring to their own communities.
So you would teach coaches how to do that as part of the integration journey, as an example of one of those techniques that you teach.
Yeah, so my head coach, Mark John Brown, who is based in Sacred Valley, he is apprenticed to two Shipibo master plant healers, and he has recorded that training and that train with his teachers, and that's included in our program as well. And then when people are able to join the practicum retreat, they can practice, with under the guidance of my head coach, Mark John, and his teachers as well. So that would be one aspect. Now, if they wanted to also do a soul retrieval, which is more of a, what we know as soul retrieval has also evolved. Many different cultures have their form of soul retrieval, but then there's kind of soul retrieval is also kind of evolved to be to have neo-shamanic forms. So you can learn how to do soul retrieval to be able to work with your clients on helping to reclaim the parts of themselves that they may have felt that they lost due to a past traumatic event. So, these are some of the shamanic tools. Now, I also have guest faculty that are teaching different kinds of more, contemporary modalities that they can also use with their clients as well. So, one of my faculty is teaching forgiveness as a navigation tool as well to use for yourself when you go into ceremonies, but also to be able to, mentor, if you were a coach, to be able to, guide your clients into approaching using that as a tool as your upcoming session or ceremony approaches. So, we have different faculty that are teaching different modalities. Another faculty member is teaching microdosing for trauma and resilience, and how to use microdosing as an integration tool as well. So that is also increasingly becoming a popular practice in the plant medicine community, to microdose with psilocybin after ayahuasca ceremony, to be able to ground more easily. And hape facilitation, so tobacco snuff, is another skill that we're also teaching in the program, because a lot of people don't know how to work with hape, and it's quite common to overdose people that you are working with.
Wow, there's a lot there. I wonder if there's any particular sequence to these kind of modalities or interventions that would be part of perhaps a typical integration journey, because I know how you frame coaching is to take somebody through a process. Is there a sequence of events or techniques or interventions that you teach?
So let me clarify too. So this program is oriented around teaching our aspiring integration providers how to be integration coaches. Now, everybody's going to have their own system, right? So again, going back to the elephant in the room, people come to the program with different skills and trainings. And so what I am inspiring my students to do is to take an assessment of their skills, of their gifts, and to be able to design their own integration process. Now, one of the things that I do offer through the Plant Spirit School Integration Coach Certification Program is I offer my own integration framework. So I have a framework that I've developed that I've offered to students of EntheoNation, and that process is called Soul Purpose Vision Quest. And Soul Purpose Vision Quest is a process of working with the insights of your ceremonial experience and being able to decode the symbols, messages, and images that were presented in the visionary state to be able to clarify what your soul purpose actually is calling you to do, and for you to clarify what your next most important action or initiative needs to be. And that framework is a framework that I'm offering to students in Plant Spirit School to be able to adopt and to make their own. So if a student comes to the program and they still don't have clarity over what their unique process is, so some of my students already have a unique process. One of my students already has her Ascension Academy. Another student has her methodology of working with recently divorced single mothers to be able to reclaim their queendom, and use their divorce experience as a tool of empowerment. So another one of my students has, her soul codes process. But, if you come to the training program and you don't have clarity over what your unique methodology is, which, the container is here to be able to help you uncover, but sometimes it takes some time. So then they have the permission to leverage or use Soul Purpose Vision Quest to adopt as their own with their own name, and you can take your clients through that process. and add your own personality, add your own tools and techniques. So let's say you, have had, many years of training in Reiki, or many years of training in EFT, then, take soul, purpose, vision, quest as a framework and add EFT to it and use it with your clients. So that's what we offer at Plant Spirit School.
Yeah. Could you take us through your methodology? Is there because there seems to be certain steps or certain things involved that you can apply when somebody comes in, or does it depend on the context of what a client is bringing in? It sounds like this is something that you apply every time somebody would approach you for integrating a psychedelic experience.
Yeah. So basically, it kind of works, like this. It's, just a very top level process. So basically what you want to do is, moving into it, just starting to uncover or look at the, signs of your soul purpose that are being presented to you in the visionary state.
Hold on. Before, how long after an experience would you see a client for a first session?
I don't know what you mean. Like,
when somebody had a retreat on, let's say, Saturday night, and how long after would you see them to start the integration journey, or what happens in between?
As soon as possible. Probably the next day. So it's kind of nice for the person to kind of come down from the experience. In my own perspective, but a lot of the realizations are most fresh the closer you are to that experience. So if you want to start to document what it was that you perceived in your journey, then it would I would suggest to be able to do that sooner rather than later, because what happens is the more distance that passes between the journey and as time passes, the memories and the afterglow start to fade.
Yeah, and the neuroplasticity will only last that long. So you would see them ideally the next day. How would they capture that experience? Is there some writing exercise, or do they capture it as they come into the session with you?
Yeah, so basically, there would be kind of like a, process to go through. There would be worksheets. There are questions, self-reflection questions. There might be assignments like, draw what you saw, or go through life and see how many times you can notice something in your day-to-day life that you saw in your dream state, or in your visionary state, or what can you replicate? So there's one, practice, which is like bridging the mundane, the mystic and the mundane. So, what can you apply to your day-to-day life that replicates what you saw in your dream or in your visionary state? So, for example, if you turned into an eagle and you flew, obviously you don't want to jump off the balcony and try to fly in the 3D realm, but maybe you want to start looking for signs in which you notice, eagles. And then, when you start to open up your doors of perception and your awareness, see where that leads you, right? Because then maybe, you might see a bookstore and you see a book that has an eagle in it. And then you walk into the bookstore and you meet somebody that ends up being the next, key to your soul purpose journey.
Right. So how do you explore that? It sounds like you explore meanings. There's particular exercises where you can look out for making links between what you've experienced, and then how does that show up in your life?
Yeah, so the process is basically start to notice what the messages are and write them down. And then to, look through at some of the similarities between, what you're seeing in the visionary state and what that says about you. So what that says about you, what your gifts are, what your highest self looks like, the lessons that you learned from whatever past experience that you had, so as we discussed in this podcast, essentially, when you start to remember the traumas that appeared in your past, sometimes you're looking at the trauma as the past experience of trauma from a third person perspective, and you're in a position to really gain the gems of wisdom, that you're in your ceremony journey, in your visionary state, you're able to integrate better. So, what wisdom can you take, and what does that say about who you were then and then who you are now? Right. And so then in order to be able to make space for the person that you want to be, being able to bring to the world with the gifts that you have, that the visionary state is showing you, like, hey, these are your sacred gifts. Maybe you should think about cultivating them more, about sharing them more, giving yourself permission to be able to, express these gifts more. Maybe your job is not allowing you to really fully express yourself in these sacred gifts. So how can you create the space in your life? And so then we go into a stage of like, okay, creating the space in your life. What do you need to purge in order to you can create the space in your life to be able to come into yourself, that highest vision version of yourself, right? So then we do an audit of all the things that you need to purge from stuff in your your physical environment. So Marie Kondo your house, because clean house, clean mind, more creativity, right? To like looking at your habits, looking at where your time goes. Looking at the people, the dramas that drain your energy, the unfinished business that drains your mental capacity, finish that business. The relationships that, maybe you need to like reframe those relationships, or set firmer boundaries. Like, so any one of those two stages that I just shared right now could be as long as they take.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I think that's where the coaching modalities come together again, and
right, and
how
then
to facilitate the integration.
Right. So then you're like purging. So purging could involve negative, beliefs, narratives about yourself. So then your modalities come in. Okay, let's do some EFT. Let's purge out, like, let's figure out where that trauma is stuck in your body, and like, love and accept yourself, and get gain the gems of wisdom from healing that, releasing and healing that trauma.
I had a quick look on the time. So I think we're already talking like nearly 2 hours. That's very nice. We always have a quick fire question section in the end that always takes a while as well. So I would propose we jump into that. And I think some of the questions we already touched and tapped into. So maybe the first question, because we already talked a bit about the trends, like you said, with the coaching businesses or integration businesses, they will become into sections or very specialized. Do you see any other current or future trends regarding coaching and psychedelics?
Well, I would say that, as more training programs start to emerge, which I think that's definitely what's going to happen, and people start to feel confused about which program is ideal for them, my advice is figure out who you want to be surrounded by and make your decision based on values. There are incredible integration training programs that are being offered by colleagues in the space. And personally, I find that like, if a person's coming to my program and they're not an ideal fit, but they're a better fit for like the Psychedelics Today Vital program, then I would happily send them there. And, if they meet somebody who is much more shamanic, and, they might send people my way too. So I kind of feel that like, first of all, like I am a big advocate of collaboration, not competition. And secondly, like values, right? So figure out like, as the programs start to expand, start by figuring out where you want to be. What do you want to be? If you really see yourself as a therapist, then maybe it does make sense to go into a program that is training up therapists, and maybe it does make sense for you to get a degree in psychotherapy so that you can be trained up as a psychedelic assisted therapist. But if you don't ever see yourself going through this the academic training that's not in your interest, you'd rather much prefer to be a coach and charge by the package and have much more flexibility and not worry about losing your license, then maybe you want to choose a program that is all about training you how to be a coach. And then figure out too, do you want to facilitate? And what do you want to facilitate? Because, there are programs that will, give you the foundation for psilocybin facilitation in some place where it's legal, like in, or not illegal, like the Netherlands or in Jamaica, for example. But then look at the evolving landscape, right? So ask yourself, do you need to go to the Netherlands to do this training if Oregon is about to legalize adult use psilocybin in 2023? Because if you're based in the United States and adult use psilocybin is going to be, legal in Oregon, and then the Oregon's going to offer their, state, kind of like licensing training, for psilocybin facilitators, well, there's going to be the Oregon state route. And you can be sure there's going to be all kinds of training programs emerging, not for Oregon, for non-Oregonians, right? So then maybe you want to think about getting your psilocybin training, getting ready to go do your psilocybin facilitation training in Oregon, and then get your integration training as your foundation first, because 2023 is not too far away.
Mm-hmm. And I might add to that that we have the current programs that are offered in coaching certification in the psychedelic space. I think we had most of them on already as guests. So if you're saying, I really like what you're saying, look at what people you want to surround yourself with. How do they frame coaching? How do they operate in the psychedelic space? Explore what their perspective is on working with psychedelics and coaching. And so we've talked to pretty much everybody, and the new training programs that are coming up, I would want to talk to them, right? So if out there, about a training program where we didn't have the founder on yet, let's talk to them, because it's such a wonderful way to get an insight into what their philosophy is behind it. And I think it's so important that we choose a certification or a training program that resonates with, what we believe in.
Absolutely. I think values are really important as well, because right now what we're seeing too is the psychedelic sector is a bit like cannabis right before legalization. So, there's a lot of cash being infused into the space. There's a lot of like venture capital money. There's a lot of cannabis cash. And so, it's we're seeing entire content platforms just mushroom up with really big budget for really great writers, just pumping out content, and then also like launching, their own training programs, right? So this is why I say like values, right? Because, who is behind the company? What is their level of integrity? What kind of like, business practices do they have? Because some of, these programs like have really questionable business practices. And do you want to actually support a business, that does, that has been, found to engage in unethical activity, or to, have had founders be, accused of like, sexual misconduct? Right. Mm-hmm. So, so these things can be, really important decisions as well. And then, who do you want to be surrounded by? Do you want to be surrounded by a bunch of doctors and psychotherapists and nurses? Or do you want to be surrounded by a bunch of, by herbalists and shamanic practitioners and, plant medicine ceremony facilitators? I mean, you want to like feel at home, right?
Yeah.
So,
and just take a moment, if you're listening to this or watching this, just take a moment how you reacted to either. Because there will be some who are absolutely in the first camp, and some are absolutely in the second camp, and some are not quite sure and need to go explore a little bit deeper and maybe hang out with the people for a little bit before you can make that kind of decision.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then also get a sense of like, hop on a call with the founder, if it's possible at all. Sometimes, it's hard to connect with the founder, but like if you can, or connect with one of the head coaches, the core faculty as well, to get a sense of like who's teaching, because these are going to be your cohort and your mentors for a good part of the year.
Yeah.
And also the alumni. So
exactly.
I think that's also a good idea, to talk to the people who run through the program and are ready yet.
And another like really important factor too, and this is also why a big decision-making factor as to why our students choose Plant Spirit School. because some of these programs are being taught by faculty members who might be incredible luminaries in psychedelic research, who have written many papers, who have pioneered clinical studies, but their role is entirely in clinical research and teaching in university. And so do you want to be, mentored by faculty whose main role or job is to, teach in a university? Or do you want to be mentored by faculty who have deep experience working with entheogenic clients because they've been integration therapists or coaches for a good, many years, if not decades, and who are also facilitators? Because if you want to, enter into the pathway of doing clinical research and to be, work for, the Veterans Administration or work in a, medical or clinical environment, then it would probably make absolute, perfect sense to go into a program where, your faculty are they're also faculty at, Imperial College London and, Johns Hopkins. But if you don't see yourself going down that track where you are trying to apply for a job at a clinic or at a Veterans Administration or at a governmental mental health services program, and if you see yourself as a solo business owner or a solo practitioner or the founder of a small coaching company, then that might not be necessary for you. And it might be more important for you to be mentored by people that have hands-on experience working with other clients and supporting their entheogenic integration.
Yeah. Look at us trying to quickfire. I do want to ask you these questions that we try to ask everybody that's on the podcast. So, but also I want to respect your time. If we go over a little bit, would that be okay with you, Lorna?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Then, and I know this could be a very big question that you could probably fill hours with, but if you were to pack it in a minute or two, what are some of the books or people that have had an impact on your work in coaching and psychedelics? If you could give people some pointers of that book really made a difference, this person is really worth following, what would you say?
Oh, that's kind of difficult. Okay, so first of all, I would say Amanda Fielding deserves more credit than she gets. So everyone should follow Amanda Fielding. She's a pioneer, and the psychedelic sector would not be what it is right now if she hadn't poured just a huge amount of resources, money and energy into the research that she's done. So Beckley Foundation is definitely an organization to follow. Let's see. Books. I really enjoyed the Phenomenology of Ayahuasca. I think that's what the book is called. The author is Benny Shannon. He did, kind of a research, a study on the common visionary landscapes that people would encounter in their ayahuasca journeys. It was really fascinating, but it's also a bit academic. So, let's see what else. Tales of a Shaman's Apprentice. I'm a huge fan of Mark Plotkin, his work at Amazon Conservation Team. I remember reading that New York Times bestseller. I absolutely loved it. I really wish that I could follow in his shoes. And it was highly enjoyable. Let's see what else. Oh, Breaking Open the Head by Daniel Pinchbeck. I really enjoyed his storytelling. I really enjoyed the alternating chapters of him talking about his own personal life experience and then some of the research and investigative journalism that he included between chapters. I've always wanted to write my rebuttal to Breaking Open the Head, which is, kind of much more grounded in eco-psychology and sustainability, but perhaps another day, when I have the time to actually write that book. But for a long time, I would give that book out to people, especially guys that I would be dating, as okay, if you want to understand me, read this book by Daniel first, and then we'll talk. Let's see. Gosh. I think that's pretty much, what's coming to the top of my head right now.
That's all good, Lorna. Let's leave it there because there's already plenty of pointers where people can follow up. I think you probably, before you go there, Julia, I think we get a good sense for what you think about regulation, that the gatekeeping is not a good thing. But do want to check in quickly because coaches often talk about regulation. Is that something that we might need in a wild west of integration with arguably a number of rogue coaches just, potentially putting people at risk? Or is regulation just in the way and it's too much gatekeeping? What do you think?
I think we kind of have to, the devil's in the details, right? So, as you know, the coaching industry is an unregulated industry. Now, there are, like the International Coach Federation, or there's like different associations that have attempted to create standards and guidelines. And then, many different, coaching companies will attempt to, kind of like bandwagon with some of these associations in order to increase the legitimacy of their, certification process. But it's very different in the coaching sector because when it comes to like licensed medical professions, there's actually like a board and there might be a supervisor, and if there is any type of malpractice, then you could potentially lose your license, and that's where the professional, regulatory mechanism, that's the value of that type of professional regulation. However, what I will say in my observation is that, as I mentioned to you, there's some physicians that are going around still who have, accusations of abuse and malpractice that are still facilitating. And it's kind of like, I think you need to maintain your license. So I don't think they're licensed physicians anymore, but they're certainly still, facilitating medicines. So what did they have to lose? They didn't renew their license anyway, right? So, and then when it comes to coaching, I think it just depends, right? So are you facilitating or are you only offering integration? So if you're facilitating, there's obviously, it's like a whole can of worms, right? Because it's something very different. Also neo-colonial, right? Who gets to credential ayahuasca shamans? Who does, it's an ancestral medicine. It's a core part of the cultural identity of a number of indigenous peoples in the Amazon. Yeah. So it's going to be credentialed according to the Shipibo culture or the Ashaninka.
Yeah. Well, when I think regulation, when I think coaching, I'm thinking preparing somebody for the journey, integrating the journey. I think when you're present while somebody's having an experience, I don't think anybody should attempt to coach them. Maybe that's a personal view, but I think this is where you leave coaching when you actively work with people. When you hold space with people, you could argue that there's parallels between coaching and guiding, but I would stay well clear from attempting to coach somebody while they're on an experience because they're in a very vulnerable state.
I don't actually mean that. I mean, if so I'm drawing the line between if you're an integration coach that does not facilitate, and if you're an integration coach and also a facilitator.
Yeah, exactly.
There's quite a lot of people.
I get you.
Exactly. So then if you're a facilitator, then that opens up a can of worms, right? Because, who gets to credential ayahuasca, ceremony or psilocybin ceremonies, right? That came from, the Mazatec peoples. So it's a little, iffy. I don't know. So I think at the end of the day, it's going to end up being, which organization do you align with the most, and what, where, the brand trust and recognition, is.
Yeah. Julia.
Shall we go with our special question regarding the screen?
Oh, I would love to ask first, because we touched on it. Therapy, coaching, where's the difference for you? When do we cross the line? Because we talked about referring, but I wonder where you see the difference. If somebody were to ask you, well, what's coaching? What's therapy? How do I know whether to work with a coach or a therapist? What would you tell them? Is there a short answer for it even?
So our short answer is, at a very broad level, a coach works with clients to be able to achieve desired life outcomes. Mm-hmm. A therapist works with patients to be able to resolve psychological or emotional problems. Very, very like, top level. Now there's a whole world of overlap in between. There's a lot of therapists that have chosen to also offer coaching. There's a lot of therapists that have chosen to not, renew their license and to operate as coaches instead. There are, coaches that offer, therapeutic, type frameworks and, ways of working within their coaching practice. So, so that's kind of, where it boils down to now. What do you want to accomplish for yourself? Do you see yourself as a client, or do you see yourself as a patient? Are you looking for a package, or are you going to want to pay by hour? So, therapists tend to charge by hour, and it's kind of hard to get people that are accustomed to working with therapists to pay by the package. Like, this is a complaint that I've heard some of my therapist friends say. They're like, like their clients or patients like only want to pay them by the hour, right? But coaches is about like, a transformational journey, and a package that helps you get from point A to point B. So if you want more flexibility to charge by the package, then you might want to consider as a provider to maybe consider the coaching path as opposed to the therapy path. If you want to accept insurance, then therapist path might be the ideal path for you, but it's going to be like some type of hourly based compensation model.
Right. So
what do you think about the supervision? So the concept of supervision, do you think it is important only for therapists, because there it is more well known, but do you think it's also relevant for coaches?
For professional supervision?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I would say like, in the therapy world, if you're definitely working with people that have problems, emotional problems, psychological problems, they're trying to heal and address like, anxiety, depression, PTSD that's getting in the way of them, like, functioning in society, then I would say, if you're working with people with more in a more vulnerable or delicate psychological or emotional state, then it would be absolutely essential to be working with a supervisor. Now, as you know, in the coaching profession, there may be some modalities that have supervisors and, people that, graduated from that modality that are now, also teaching as teaching assistants and supervisors and, kind of like guides, like elders, to the new group of students, right? So you might find coaching programs that have that type of structure. And then you have many, many coaching programs that do not.
I think it's such a helpful place to reflect on what you do professionally in coaching and in any other profession. I think I can only encourage it. And I totally agree with you, Lorna, that it's absolutely essential when you work with people who are going through a deep journey where they feel quite fragile. It's vital, but it's so helpful to anybody who appreciates reflecting on their work and growing from what you're doing and having an outside perspective of curiosity of like, what was it like for you? How are you doing? We're carrying a lot sometimes when we listen to people's stories that come out of psychedelic journeys. So I think it's important that even if you work as a coach moving forward beyond trauma, there's no trauma maybe. It's just helping somebody move forward with something. It's important we reflect, and the supervisor is exactly that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important that, I'm a big fan of, a coach having their own coach as well. So, I think it's essential to be able to have like some type of feedback mechanism to be able to help resolve, any types of questions or cases that might come up in the course of your coaching practice, but then to also be able to learn and grow as well. So in the coaching industry, like let's say if you have a program and, that program does not provide supervisors to be able to, be those continuing mentors for coaches trained in your methodology, then, in the very least, consider having like your own mentor as well. So for me, most of the coaches that I've had have been in the realm of business coaching. And so business coaching, you don't typically have a supervisor, that like shadows you, as you like, support your own clients in, their, coaching practice. But, for many of us who are also growing our coaching businesses, we have our own mentors and coaches that we work with to be able to learn, grow, and to expand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that would be an important question to ask. Like, if it's important for you, if you're seeking a coach to support you, to ask them like, hey, do you have mentors?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fantastic question. Mm-hmm. Julia, I think we can go there now. Do you want to go there?
Great. Yes. I love the screen question. So imagine you have a screen and you can talk to a amount of people with it. So what would you put on that screen? So what should the screen show for 1 minute, a message that you want to transport to a lot of people out there?
Any kind of message?
Any kind of message. It could be could be a group of people, could be an individual, could be the whole world. But you have a minute to transport a message.
I would say, if you're thinking about working with entheogenic plant medicines, just to remember that really the relationship is between yourself and the medicine as your plant spirit guide. And the shaman's only the person that is opening the door, so to speak. And as you explore that relationship with your plant teacher, to really take the opportunity to learn about who you truly are. Because remember, everything that we think is real in this 3D simulation, so to speak, is truly a dream. And you will find yourself quite often back in a place outside of time and space, where actually that place is the place that we always go back to. And so when you think about who it is that you are in the world and what you want to be, allow for the wisdom of the plant teachers to really show you what is absolutely essential in life. And for many of us that go through this journey, we find that the things that we think are important, that society and culture tell us are important, are absolutely non-essential and actually keep us disconnected from our true nature. And that really, at the end of the day, it's about who we truly are, our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to our health, our relationship to our family, the people around us, and to the natural world, and how we take care of all these things as a integral piece or member in the web of life. Aho.
Aho. Thank you. Hey, where can people find your work? And also, most importantly, you talked about your program. How can people access it? We put a link in the description, obviously, but there's also something you wanted to offer to people. So where do people go if they wanted to be more in your sphere?
Yeah, so you can check out the program by visiting plantspiritschool.com. And if you decide to step into the program because you listen to this podcast, then there is a special discount for you. If you apply for a Catalyst session and decide to step into the program, please mention that you heard about the program through this podcast, and mention that the coupon code ENTHEO to redeem $150 off from your tuition.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Lorna, is there anything else you wanted to say before we part ways?
I think I feel pretty complete. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciated our conversation. It was a pleasure. And I hope you're able to inspire more people to explore the profound transformational world of coaching, especially psychedelic integration coaching.
I think that's what you've just done. So thank you for your time. Mm-hmm. Right. I know you're very busy, so thank you
so much. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Bye-bye.